Dr. Rebecca Walker joins us now, a senior researcher at the Centre for Migration and Society at Witwatersrand University. Rebecca, good afternoon.
Good afternoon and afternoon to your listeners.
A general response first up before we perhaps come in with a couple of more focused questions to what the President said on national television last night?
Sure. I think overall what he said last night was what we expected him to say, which was basically that, he spoke about the problems in the country, he spoke about xenophobia being wrong, and he said all the right things about how we shouldn't allow xenophobic violence, but ultimately he then used the focus on illegal migration to sort of pivot away from actually taking responsibility and accountability for the problems in the country. And it was a very strategic and it was basically a very obvious strategy in which he sort of shifted the lens away from talking about why the state is failing to talking about who we can blame. So he, in many ways, played straight into the kind of what we expected.
I read that in the article that you co-wrote with two colleagues, well, one colleague and one person from Lawyers for Human Rights, and that's not the impression I took away from it completely. He's never going to accept complete responsibility because he doesn't bear complete responsibility for the terrible shape that our country is in. But I didn't get the sense that you got, that he kind of loaded all the blame onto illegal migrants.
So what I'm saying is that it was a very subtle way of doing it, but a very, very obvious way in that he kind of shifted so that he dropped in this idea around, or this issue around illegal migration, whilst taking account and talking about the other challenges. So it's a very sort of it's a strategy where you acknowledge what the problems are, you acknowledge people's pain, you talk about the things that the government needs to address, and you say migrants aren't responsible for all of these. But then because you then shift to talking about illegal immigration, that becomes the focus, and that is what people will take away. Everything that comes before is irrelevant once you start talking about illegal migration, because where people then go to and where he went to, and it was not a rhetorical slip, it was a very clear strategy, is that ultimately at the root of this is a problem around border control and illegal migration.
But we do have a problem with border control and illegal migration. It might not be the problem, but it is a problem.
We have a problem, not so much with border control, but with understanding how we work with migration in this country, and with ensuring that migrants are documented, and that we actually recognize that migrants themselves are not a problem. And I think we always jump to talking about border control and this being a problem, but actually our starting point needs to be recognizing what the reality of the situation is. And that means hammering down what the data tells us and what we know, which is, we say this every time, that less than 5% of the country is composed of migrants, including those who are undocumented. They cannot be held responsible for the problems in this country. Yes, we all want secure borders. Yes, we all want to feel safe. But we are constantly saying that there is some way in which we're going to feel safe and the country's suddenly going to be fixed if we get rid of undocumented migrants. And it's very clear that is not what's going to happen.
But that's what some people say, but it's also what not a lot of people say. And there are a lot of people, and I don't regard myself as being particularly important, but I'm one of many that says we need to find a different way of communicating the facts to make them land home, because 1.8% of total school desks in the country are occupied by foreigners. Foreigners are net creators. All of those things which research shows to, in my mind at least, to be irrefutably true. They are not landing, and we need to find different ways of communicating this so that people take out their ire on the local councillors who ruin their lives, not on the few immigrants, legal and illegal, who are part of that particular geographic community.
Absolutely, but that's, that's the very message that is not hitting home because it's being avoided by government, and it's playing straight into the hands of those, the vigilante organizations who really want us to only talk about migration. And it's important to be clear about these movements as well, such as Operation Dodula and March, because they're not actually interested in controlling migration, and they're not interested in improving South African lives. They have no strategy or policy other than saying we must get rid of illegal migrants or even just migrants overall. And they want to insert themselves into a political game. So when we say, yes, maybe, Ramaphosa wasn't explicitly blaming migrants and he was quite clear about saying violence is not the right route, he also knows that, he has to come down hard, and he needs to, make sure that he's going to get the votes with the upcoming elections. So it was a very obvious way in which he was trying to insert himself into that discussion. But rather than stealing the thunder from those organizations, what he did was hand them a megaphone, basically.
You said we mustn't talk too much about border control, but don't we need better border control? Don't we want a situation where people arrive in our country either invited with permission, with prior permission before arriving in our country, or if they do arrive in our country without permission, we have a fair, compassionate, efficient system which deals with them and either grants them permission to stay in this country or with compassion and kindness returns them to the safest country between us and them. And it's just that to constantly deny people's citizens' fears and worries and anxieties and prejudices and wrong-headedness about immigrants because there are groups like March and Operation Dodula. I think there's an error in there as well, Rebecca.
I think that we need to be clear that nobody is saying that there isn't a migration management problem. Okay, we're not saying there isn't an issue, and we know that issues around documentation and around accessing that is a problem. And at the same time, we're also not denying that people are really struggling. People are really battling in their lives, and that pain and frustration is real. But we can't put the two and two together and allow this narrative to continue. And although it sounds a very simplistic type way of speaking, if we look at what is coming out continuously in the media, continuously being reinforced and circulating, is a discussion that moves away from any evidence and allows us to then not talk about, what is the real problem, but to talk about strong borders and security, but without coming up with actual solutions. Yes, we want people who claim asylum legitimately to be received with compassion and to be able to access their rights. And we want those who come in on other visas to be able to maintain their documentation. But the system right now is in such a mess that nobody is able to actually even regulate the documents as supposed to be on. And the system itself ensures that many people become undocumented once they're here. So we need to fix that system first. And this is a governance failure, not a migration failure. And once we do that and have an honest conversation about what has caused 30 years of compounding failure, then we can move on to talking about borders. But for the moment, that conversation is just detracting from what the actual issues are.
Dr. Rebecca Walker, Senior Researcher at Wits University's African Center for Migration and Society.